Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I see people dropping in. That's great. So we'll just give it a few minutes before we kick off. So take some time to get settled. Cup of tea, cup of coffee. We'll start shortly in a minute or so. Great, numbers rising. We expect quite an international group today, so welcome from wherever in the world you're joining from. My name is Gwen Cunningham, and I'm the lead of the textiles program at Circular Economy, and it's my pleasure to be the host of today's webinar. We're going to kick off in just a few seconds, just waiting for that number to stabilize, make sure that we have everyone in the room. So welcome to the Switch to Circular Economy Value Chains Explanatory webinar. The overall aim of today is just to really provide those of you listening with all of the information and the context that you need to be able to submit an application to the recent call for expressions of interest. So we have just over an hour together, an hour and 15 minutes, and you'll be hearing from a selection of the team. And hopefully this will be a very informative webinar for you. Some housekeeping before we get started. The first thing that I would say is to note that today's session is being recorded and it will be made available to you after the session closes, so that if you need to look back for any reason to clarify any questions that are outstanding, or perhaps to share this recording with members of your team, that will be possible. The second thing to say is that we do have 15 minutes reserved at the end of the session for a Q&A. So please, as we go through the deck today, feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat, which you can see in the bottom of your screen. We will aim to get through all of them. If that's not possible, then we'll gather everything and make sure that we answer those in an FAQ document that we can share out to you following today's session. So we're going to kick off. And I will just click us through to the next slide. So the agenda for today is as follows. We will have a small welcome and background to the project. We'll walk through the project scope and the eligibility for those of you who are looking to put forward an application. Then what exactly is the application process and how will these applications be evaluated and assessed for final selection. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time going into a deep dive into the two value chains that are of focus. So the textiles and garments value chain and the plastics packaging value chain, and really sketch out some example projects for those of you listening, so that you get a sense of what we're looking for and what is within scope. And then, as I said, we'll have a Q&A and next steps at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to move us into the project overview, and I will hand over to Akos, who will give us a welcome and a background.
Gwen, thank you so much for the nice start and the introduction. Let me also warmly welcome all of you who are participating and show this interest in this call for proposals. I will give a brief background on the project. This is funded by the European Union. The title is to switch to circular economy value chains. It has a duration of 5 years. It started in December 2020. We are in the inception phase, or we progress well in the inception phase. We selected 2 value chains. So the plastic packaging and the textiles and garments, which is the subject of the calls for proposals. The main purpose is to support enterprises to adopt circular economy practices. UNIDO is leading this partnership, and we have 3 very prominent partners: Chatham House, Circular Economy, and the European Investment Bank. Although I need to still highlight here that we are in the final stages of concluding the contractual agreement arrangements with the EIB. The next slide, please. Thank you. So the switch will catalyze comprehensive change. The project main purpose is to make sure that there is transformation towards a circular economy in selected value chains. And in parallel, there is an intention to contribute to sustainable growth, low carbon and climate resilient development, decent jobs creation, safer, healthier, and pollution-free environment. And we haven't highlighted here, but also the gender aspects will be also an important element. We have 2 distinct outcomes. On one side, we have a very clear focus on increased policy uptake in the value chains and the countries who will participate in the projects. And on the other side, to go look into practical solutions to improve circularity in the private sector in these value chains. The circular transitions are very complex. So I believe most of you know well either the value chain or circular economy models and methodologies. In this project, the European-based value chains or multinationals are targeted, since the fund is coming from the European Union. But we all recognize that the multinational companies need to work closely with the suppliers from the developing countries. And this is also our aim in this project, to make sure that there is a very close partnership between the developing country suppliers and the European multinational companies. We are looking for well-designed pilot cases in these 2 value chains to make sure that we can identify, test, and scale circular economy practices. Our project aims to help support the shift to a circular economy model in target value chains and countries. And actually, we are also trying, and we will be replicating those results. And we will try to make sure that there is a proper awareness raising and knowledge sharing, not only in those countries and value chains, but also in other countries and other value chains. And in terms of the outputs, we have 5 different outputs. The first one is on the knowledge on circular opportunities in selected countries. So we will identify those knowledge opportunities, we will develop and disseminate them. The second output is the pilot project design and implementation, which is the main focus of our today's discussions, that it has also the largest budget in the project. Under the output 3, the SMEs and also the micro SMEs, micro enterprises will be also supported to adopt circular economy approaches and to facilitate access to finance, which certainly in many cases one of the major barriers. Under the output 4, there will be a strong private sector dialogue and the project consultative forum and networking in the selected value chains will be facilitated. The output 5 will be very specifically focusing on the development of financial products in those value chains and countries concerned. So that's in a nutshell about the project, and I give back the floor to Gwen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akash. And I will pass the word on to Klaas next from Chatham House. And Klaas is going to tell us more about the project scope and eligibility.
Thanks, Gwen. Really good to see everyone on the call. And I'm here to talk a little bit more about that output 2 that Akash briefly introduced. That's what we're hoping loads of you are here for. And we're going to give you information on how you can get involved in pilot projects or lay out pilot projects. But it's worth stating up front that all of this information is also available on detailed call guidelines, which are published on the UNIDO website. So you can access those in full after the webinar if you need to. So starting off with how these projects can look and who can apply. They need to meet certain essential criteria. So the purpose of the project needs to target the suppliers of EU multinational companies to switch to circular economy approaches and practices. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what those mean. The sector, as Akos mentioned, needs to be in either textiles and garments or plastic packaging. Activities need to be relevant circular economy activities for each sector. We've outlined a few that we're going to go through in more detail. And the location needs to be in a non-G20 developing country. We'll also define that further later on. On a very broad scale, the project needs to meet 4 essential criteria. A project needs to be at least 1.5 million euros in total budget. 25% of this budget should be coming from an EU multinational as co-investment. And given the fact that projects are expected to last for 3 to 4 years, that means the expected commitment from the EU multinational should be around 150,000 euros per annum, at least. This investment from the EU multinational will be matched by significant support from the consortium, which we will describe a little bit later. And this support will primarily target suppliers, and projects should ideally target at least 2 suppliers to be appropriate, but more are welcome. So next up, we've got the countries that are in scope. So the countries that we're looking at for the project are any country listed on the OECD DAC ODA list. There's a link to that if you want to review it in more detail. Worth noting is that it doesn't include G20 members as eligible countries for support in our project. That means that some large markets like Brazil, China, India will be excluded. Pilot projects can give support to several countries, and some activities may be eligible for support also in the European Union, but the predominant part of the support should target developing countries that are not part of the G20. So who can apply and who can form a consortium? The large picture for both value chains is that the lead applicant of a consortium should be an EU multinational company. That means they should have their headquarters in the EU, they should have majority-owned affiliates abroad, and they will ultimately be the lead of the project and should also invest in the project with that co-financing requirement of 25%. They should be applying together with a supplier projects in collaboration with suppliers. And those suppliers should be based in the developing countries defined earlier. These are the ones that are eligible for project support, and for the support to be appropriate, suppliers should be involved in the design and implementation of the project from the outset. The applications can also be supported by associated parties. We recognize that consortia might need to look for external support with various parts of the circular transition. And as such, several different types of organizations are eligible as associated parties. You can see them on the right side of the screen, but I think the main thing to note here is that for associated parties to also be eligible for part of the project support, they need to be based in a non-G20 developing country. Otherwise, they are expected to contribute to the project with their own efforts and means. Next slide, please. So for plastic packaging, the scope of eligible applicants is defined as follows. So the lead applicant, the EU multinational, should be either a manufacturer or a user of plastic packaging. In the core guidelines, there are specific codes associated with this. All you need to know now is that you can Google those codes and review them in more detail. But the products that are produced by the company or used by the company can both be plastic made or plastic containing. Co-applicants should be manufacturers of plastic or plastic containing packaging or raw material suppliers for such. A quick slide overview is the next one of just those HS codes of eligible plastic type products. You can look at those in more detail later. Worth noting is that 4811 is an HS code for beverage cartons. So that is the type of plastic containing packaging that would also be in scope for this project. And in terms of the eligible activities for the plastic packaging value chain, the project is to have circular transition and circular approaches tested and piloted. And those activities can entail loads of things. They are listed in the core guidelines once again, but a brief overview of them is provided here. So they can target anything from the design stage to the production stage to the end of life stage. So things like including more post-consumer recycled content or switching to sustainable production models and technologies and assessing the environmental impact of those. Or at the end of life, you can trial recycling technologies and ideally loop back some of that material into your operations. So that is it from a plastic packaging point of view. And now we're going to look more at textiles and garments. So I'll hand over.
Thank you, Klaas. And I'd just like to remind everyone listening that if there are any questions that are arising already at this stage, to feel free to drop those into the Q&A, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have time to answer them later on. So I'm going to also just, in a similar fashion, run through who can apply from a textiles and garments perspective. And this is, of course, in addition to the more general criteria that Klaas just walked us through. So for textiles and garments, the lead applicants must be a multinational enterprise who have at least one principal business line in wholesale and resale trade of textile products, and who are sourcing textile products which have been processed in the aforementioned developing countries and territories. And to see this briefly on the value chain, just to draw attention that this is the space where a lead applicant would be playing a role within the value chain. On the other side, of course, co-applicants are crucially important to the project. And here, what we define as a co-applicant for textiles and garments are applicants that have at least one principal business line responsible for activities categorized as manufacturing, remanufacturing, or recycling and repair of textile products. And again, you see the codes there that, as Klaas said, you can dive into with a Google if you want to learn more. But just to emphasize that again on the supply chain, these are partners active in manufacturing, remanufacturing, recycling, or repair, and in the countries that were previously mentioned by Klaas. Then we do want to also specify and outline what exactly we mean by textiles in according to the HS codes 50 to 63. So you here see them listed, everything from silk, wool, cotton, etc. This is important to mention and to draw attention to because, for instance, if you were a multinational or a supplier busy with, for instance, the production and sale of leather goods, it would not fall within the categorization and the definition here. So good to be made aware of what we classify as textiles. And similar to the case of plastics packaging, really there is a huge scope of activity that is eligible. And we really do want to emphasize that this is not what you see here on the slide, an exhaustive list. And these things can also be viewed in combination, but several activities all the way from the design stage to production to end of life are absolutely in scope. And we will exemplify some of this in an exemplary textiles project later on. But just to run through them briefly, from a design perspective, it can really be around the reduction of products' environmental impact through design, for durability and for cyclability, for instance. So that could be activities such as conducting LCAs of current portfolios, conducting circular redesign of select products that have a high potential for impact, developing manufacturing guides with and for suppliers, and then, of course, assessing investment needs to scale the outcomes of that work. From a production perspective, it could really be around activities to reduce production waste, to reduce water use, to adopt better chemical systems, etc. And from an end-of-life perspective, and this is similar to the project that we will see later on as an exemplary, it could be around the switch from virgin to recycled. How do you identify accurate and eligible feedstock supplies? How do you produce prototypes using recycled content? And also, how do you look at the need for investment in order to scale those circular supply chains that have been built? So really, there is quite a broad scope of work that can fall within this. And I'm going to hand back to Klaas to talk us through what support is available.
Yeah, so once you've identified a suitable project of circular activities and piloting circular approaches, you can scope that out. It can live up to that at least 1.5 million euros threshold, and the activities that fit within that budget will then be supported by the Switch consortium to a large degree. And that support comes in the form of technical assistance and capacity building support, or advice on access to finance. And under these headings, a lot can fit in. So the idea is that the project should be suitable to the circular transition and the applicants involved. And the Switch consortium will look to support those in the best way possible. So bear in mind that the technical support available can cover anything from factory audits to promotion of public-private dialogue, but feel free to use your creativity in this and think of ways in which the Switch consortium can pull on both their own capabilities, but also an expert pool which is available to the project, which will support on areas where the Switch consortium members themselves will not be involved. So there's a wide range of expertise available to support these projects, and hopefully it should cover off most angles. Worth noting on the advice on access to finance, something that we are explicitly promoting from the Switch consortium side is that projects should bear in mind the scalability and the legacy of the project. So projects which express a clear intent to seek additional commercial funding after the project is over will be favored. I guess on to the next section after we've gone through that pretty dense scope and eligibility. It's the application process. So the application process will be based on an independent panel, and that independent panel will review applications according to a set of criteria. So the criteria are outlined, and they cover a load of things. They are meant to promote you to submit holistic, circular and sustainable projects that bear in mind both social and environmental dimensions to sustainability. They deal with the circular capabilities and value chain influence of the organizations that are applying. It also deals with the project itself, so how relevant that is to the purposes and the objectives of the Switch project, which are outlined in the core guidelines, how appropriate the methodology is for realizing the project activities, and as well the focus on legacy is there as well, so the potential to replicate or scale the projects after project end is really important. The full selection grid is available in the core guidelines. The process for this is that all parties who are interested in submitting expressions of interest should download all of the relevant documentation, have a good read through it, think of project ideas, and then they should submit those applications to the email outlined on this slide. And those expressions of interest should include both a clear project plan as well as CVs of relevant parties involved in the application and a budget template. So you have about 6 weeks between now and the end of the application window. And once those have been submitted, they go off to the independent assessor panel, who will review the applications and hopefully give you a notification of award by the end of July. And that there will be more detailed project design activities. So the actual fitting of switch consortium and multinationals and supplier capabilities will happen at a later stage. The expressions of interest are for you to outline a well thought through idea, but the meat on the bones will be developed once projects have been selected from this EOI procedure. So I guess next on is the value chain deep dive. We can look a bit closer at that. But as Gwen said, if there's anything around application process or eligibility, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A and we'll pick it up later.
Yes, great. And all questions are welcome. No question is a bad question. So we are going to dive into the value chains. And the purpose of this is to give a taste of the types of projects that you can think of when applying. And I'm going to hand the word over to my colleague Hilda to take us through the first, which is textiles and garments.
Yes, thank you very much, Gwen. So to illustrate what a project could look like, we wanted to take this opportunity to talk you through an example of a project. This is very much an example. I mean, there are many different ways that you could design a project. The one that I'm going to present is obviously on textiles and garments, but is very much recycling focused. But you can also imagine that you might want to submit a project that is more design focused, or so there are really different ways of setting up a project. But just to illustrate the kind of projects that the Switch would be looking for, I would like to take this opportunity to talk you through one of them. So let's assume that I am an EU-based multinational company and I am a retailer of garments. So in that sense, I tick the boxes to be a lead applicant. That's perfect. And I'm very troubled by the very linear system that I'm part of. So I know that there's huge amount of resources needed to produce my garments. Meanwhile, I see that post-consumer, so once consumer is done using the garment, that most of these garments are landfilled or incinerated, and that less than 1% of material is used to produce clothing, to turn old clothing into new clothing. So I'm bothered by this linear system. I want to play an active role in changing it and starting with my own supply chain, obviously. Meanwhile, as I'm a EU-based multinational company, I'm very aware that the European Waste Directive stipulates the separate collection of used textiles by 2025. And they're also investigating extended producer responsibility scheme. So also there, the European government is also in the coming years expecting me to take a more active role. So I see this opportunity very much as a chance to basically see how a circular system where I take back garments, turn them into new ones, could work within my own value chain. Obviously, I cannot do this alone, even though I am a multinational retailer. So one, I will need to secure garments that somehow come into my value chain at the end of their life. But I also need to work very closely with my value chain partners to ensure that these old garments can be turned into high quality new ones. So these value chain partners I'm referring to could be mechanical recyclers, spinners, fabric and garment manufacturers. And most of these organizations are actually based in developing G20 countries. So they're also not next door. So I really want to ensure that before I start looking for recycled content to include in my products, that actually my preferred value chain partners are able to provide me with the right inputs. And so therefore, I really want to work actively with these suppliers based in developing countries to assess how we could turn these old clothes into new clothes. So that is very much the aim, and I'm now going to set up this project. So to incorporate recycled content in my products, I'm facing a few barriers that I think I could address through the Switch project. So the first one is a key one, it's technical capacity. So one, there have to be technical adjustments to the machinery and processes, because we've not been working, for instance, if I make lots of cotton products, I've never worked with recycled cotton before, only virgin materials. It might need some adaptation to the machinery of my value chain partners, or we might need to upgrade it, or we might need to change something. So the one is the technical adjustment in relation to machines. And the other one is a training of production staff, because we will basically be designing a different process. The second one is more on the collaboration, because if you close a circle, then suddenly organizations that never have been collaborating become interdependent. So also there, that is a key barrier that I intend to address through this project. And last point there is, I want to ensure that the quality and technical performance of the products that I'm creating is at the same level as the current virgin products. So also that I want to include testing in my project. And the last one is consumer engagement. So this project could offer me an opportunity to show my clients the value of recycled content and the need for them to dispose of their garments in a good way. So what does my project look like? I'm the lead applicant. You can see me there in blue, the retailer. And I'm involving 3 suppliers that are all based in developing countries. That's a mechanical recycler, but that's actually an integrated mechanical recycler spinner. It's a fabric maker, and it's a garment manufacturer. But I need more partners than only my value chain partners. So I also have some associated parties added to the consortium. One of them is the machine developer, as I mentioned before. To ensure that this is technically feasible, maybe one of my suppliers might need to change their equipment. So I need a machine developer to be on board. Testing, I mentioned before, very important. So test laboratory as associated party, and a training center, because I want to develop the capacities amongst my suppliers to realize high quality recycled products. Very briefly, a few, so the activities, I intend to do a project for 3 years. In year 1, it will be all about research and innovation. So assess the current performance, assess current capabilities, technical feasibility of my ambitions, and also find post-consumer textile feedstock. Second year is very much about testing and building capacities. So that's basically where you're going to run things in a different way. And third year, it will be more about lessons learned. What would this model look like? How can we scale it up further on? So basically to turn the outcomes of year 2 into ways to scale up the impact in the future. There are many benefits from this project. First one for co-applicants, so in my case, for my suppliers, because they know that these kind of questions are going to come. And this is an opportunity for them to basically test and adapt their processes and train their staff. For me, because it means that I can really realize or start testing the feasibility of my circular ambitions, and also to show leadership, because I really take action and don't really only share commitments. And lastly, for the target countries, because it really enables them to, contribute to sustainable growth, create decent jobs, and where needed, adapt to regulatory conditions to ensure circularity is possible.
Great. Thank you, Hilda. Hopefully that gave some food for thought, and maybe more clarifying questions are popping up. So again, please drop those in the chat as they come to you. And Klaas is going to walk us briefly through a high-level version of the same for plastics and packaging.
Thanks, Gwen, and great to see so many questions coming up. Fire more through. For plastic packaging, many of the same principles apply as to the textiles and garments value chain. So in a similar way, you could test a recycled content provider out and include that in your plastic packaging and try and integrate that with your existing value chain. But just to walk you through a motivation to the plastic value chain and why we're looking at this issue. So as a multinational, you will be aware that there's a huge plastic waste problem in the world today, and the plastic pollution of ocean and land is degrading ecosystems, and it's causing pollution for human beings and an unsafe environment to live in. And the problem is biggest in countries where plastic waste management systems haven't been able to keep up with the evolution of plastic arisings. So relatively developed plastic waste systems exist in the Western world, but in the countries that are in scope for the support of this project, there needs to be significantly more investment in solutions, and multinationals have an opportunity to be leaders in this transition together with their suppliers. So in order to tackle that problem, you could, similar to textiles and garments, implement recycling and recycled content solutions. But another way to do it could also be via reuse solutions. And these are also extremely effective in eliminating waste altogether and fit very nicely into the circular economy. In order to realize reusable solutions, cross-value chain collaboration is needed. And for example, such cross-value chain collaboration could target to test refill on the go or return on the go models. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has outlined a really useful framework for how you can implement reuse solutions. And some of these will require substantial changes to the way suppliers create packaging and what specifications they need to produce too. So the potential project consortium could look something like this. You would have a brand owner, that is the lead applicant. They would work together with a packaging supplier to develop new reusable, either returnable or refillable packaging concepts. They would probably need to seek support from an innovation partner or a technology partner that can identify useful solutions for measuring the performance of the reuse, as well as identifying relevant solutions that are going to work with consumer journeys and social contexts. And retailers would need to be heavily involved in such a consortium to be able to distribute the reusable solution, but also probably facilitate some kind of return or refill infrastructure or logistics. So the consortium would look slightly different, but similar principle. The lead applicant has to be the EU multinational. The co-applicant needs to be the supplier of that multinational, and other associated parties with a base in developing countries that are non-G20 members could also apply for support and support the project in that way. So I know we have loads of different people on this call from various backgrounds, but I guess there are several different next actions that you could undertake in order to start planning out potential switch supported projects. If you are an EU multinational, sensible next steps might be to, if you don't already know, map hotspots in your developing country portfolio to figure out where do you have lots of materials that could fit for circular approaches. involve your suppliers early on in the conversation of scoping projects. Identify scalable circular opportunities that could use the Switch support, and reach out to enabler organizations that can make this happen so that you and your suppliers will have relevant support. If you're a supplier yourself, then identify opportunities for your business to transition to circular approaches, or if you know of circular solutions already that you'd like to try out, see if you can get your customers interested in applying together with you. If you're a potential associated party who fits into the wide bracket of all the other organizations that may have an interest in piloting circular approaches, find existing projects of EU multinationals and their suppliers, or reach out to them and suggest ideas for what approaches you think they could pilot in partnership with you. So shall we go back to you, Gwen?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. And I see that we are right on time. We have a good chunk of 15 to 20 minutes still left for questions, which is great because they're coming in thick and fast. Some have already been answered in the chat, so if you're curious to see those, you can also click in and see the answered questions there. But maybe I'll kick us off, and I'm just going to address these to both you, Hilda, and Klaus. There's quite some people asking for more clarification around the eligibility depending on countries. So is this applicable to EU textile companies that are sourcing and producing in India? That's one thing that quite a few now have asked. Maybe good to clarify.
I guess, yeah. So the consortium does allow for applicants to be from countries that aren't applicants from countries that aren't in scope, such as India, because it's a G20 member, would not receive the technical assistance or capacity building or advice on access to finance. That's the nature of support available to those applicants that are in scope countries.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, makes good sense. Another one here, which I've seen come in twice: will the consortium actually finance the project?
No, so there's no direct financial support. As Klaus mentioned also on his slide, he included some examples. Support can be through capacity building programs, audits, these kind of activities. So they do benefit the organizations that are part of the project, but there's no direct financial support that is provided through the Switch project.
Great, thank you. Hopefully that clarifies it. If not, please drop your questions again into the Q&A. A great question here asking, is there a forum to connect interested lead applicants to other organizations that could act, for instance, as an associate partner? So are the Switch Consortium facilitating some pre-application networking and matchmaking at all? Maybe a good one for you, Klaus.
I wonder if I need to pass this one on to Akos, maybe, to respond to.
Sure, let me try. Well, specifically, we haven't envisaged to make a direct linking up of applicants. What we can definitely provide is we will have expert teams on both the textiles value chain and also the plastic value chain. So whenever, let's say, we get an application or interest, we will engage with you in discussions. So we may have now participants who are from a developing country and they are a supplier to an MNC. It would be quite advisable that you get in direct touch with the EU MNC you are working with. So to come up with a project idea, we can of course engage in discussions. So if you need some support where you have a very specific potential partnership, but you are unable to move, we will be doing our best to help. But again, we will not have the capacity to start and making up a proper matchmaking from the various applications.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. One come in here again, thinking from the financial perspective, will this project support buying of equipment, e.g. equipment that can ensure less water usage or equipment for recycling?
No.
I guess that would qualify for the direct, that would be direct support, which is not available under the project. However, some of the support that is outlined as eligible activities is the identification of such relevant technologies, as well as support for finding finance for such technologies. So indirectly, it can be made easier via Switch, but the direct finances for buying equipment is not there via the project.
Great, thank you, Klaus. And I see some thanks coming in there. I am also I'm looking at some questions that we had anticipated as potential questions, which maybe also help to clarify kind of the scope and eligibility question. So here, for instance, if there is a company that has an ongoing project supporting informal waste pickers and recycler communities in Malaysia, for instance, would that qualify as a Switch project? This is just a sample project, but how would that qualify, Klaus?
Yeah, thanks. My connection's a bit odd, so if I break up, please fill in the gaps. But Switch should be used to support additional circular efforts. So it's just worth noting that if there's an existing program, you will need to demonstrate really clearly how the Switch support enables further scaling or improvement of those existing efforts. In addition, if it's an existing program that focuses on informal waste pickers or recyclers, those will need to be tied into the manufacturing side of the value chain in order for it to fit under the Switch umbrella. So ideally, the activities supporting informal recyclers should then aim to get recycled content back into manufacturing. And then it could work, but you need to think about how it will fit those quite specific eligibility criteria.
Great. I think it really helps actually to kind of think through some of these potentials, because then you come to this nuance. So I'm gonna fire another one at you, Klaus. I hope you don't mind. But let's say, for instance, that a multinational is seeking support for a project that's aiming to replace plastic packaging with a non-plastic material, which I can imagine is something that might be already playing on some of the minds of the listeners. How would that qualify, or what considerations should they take into account?
Yeah, so you can technically get a plastic elimination project through Switch. So by replacing plastic with an alternative that is environmentally better than plastics, you can get that eligible. So you can have a co-applicant that is plastic supplier, and some support would need to target that co-applicant which produces plastics. But equally, you could also have an associated party, which is a non-plastic supplier. So that non-plastic supplier would be an associated party, headquartered and based in a developing country, and then they would receive support for replacing plastics with that new alternative. And I guess just to kill two birds in one stone, I saw a question on for plastics packaging, can a co-applicant or an associated party be a knowledge partner? So yes, they can be a knowledge partner, can be an associated party. So for example, in the context of a plastic elimination project, you may need a knowledge partner to conduct an LCA showing that the plastic alternative on environmental terms is actually better than a plastic packaging alternative. That knowledge partner would need to be based in a developing country to be eligible for support, like any other associated party. but they could very much be part of the consortium that applies.
Great. Maybe 3 birds with 1 stone. I see also a question coming in, probably triggered by that. That's quite related. As a global packaging company, could Switch fund a plastic waste to energy project under the pilot? Class, I wonder, maybe you've dropped off. Did you hear that that last question, Class?
No, got connection issues. Maybe Hilda can cover in the meantime.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Maybe we'll switch tack and look at textiles and some of the potential cases that could come through there. So my company intends to replace chemicals by more environmentally friendly alternatives. Would such activities be eligible for support? And what role would my chemical supplier then play in the project?
Yes. So yes, that is exactly the kind of project that would contribute to the reduction of the environmental footprint of the value chain. So in that sense, it sounds very interesting. So yes, it would be eligible for Switch support. What would then be the role of this chemical supplier that would be comparable to this machine developer that I had in my example? So that would be an associated party. Because they are not a direct supplier to the EU multinational, but they are quite critical to the project. And if then also this chemical supplier is based in a developing country, that would mean that even though they are an associated party, they would be eligible for support from the Switch project. So yes, that sounds like a very relevant project and very much in the within the scope of Switch.
Great, great, thanks, Hilda. I'm gonna throw another one your way.
Yeah.
So is the reduction of the environmental footprint of existing activities throughout the supply chain considered a relevant project? So really looking at
I understand the confusion because of course it's Switch is about the switch to circular economy practices, but the reduction of environmental footprint, so we used to call more like sustainability, is very much also within the scope of the Switch project. For instance, part of the project could be audits to currently assess the environmental footprint of activities within the supply chain, and then define measures that could be taken to reduce the environmental footprint, and also there at the end of the project measure them and see how the impact could be replicated in other parts of the supply chain, for instance, or in other suppliers. So yes, that also would be within scope of the Switch project.
Great, thank you. You may hear some background noise here because it started to torrentially rain where I am in Ireland. No surprises there. I see also some questions are being answered directly into the Q&A, so please keep an eye out for that. If you have any other final questions, please drop them in now. Now is your chance. Otherwise, we are going to start wrapping up. So I will see if any final ones drop in. I see a great question asking, will there be similar projects for G20 countries? So hopefully that's an indication of the level of interest. And we do hope that those listening are compelled to apply and to start the application process. If Klaas or if Hilda, if you see any questions that we have not yet answered.
Yeah, there's one, I think it's the last one that came in. Support can go to areas of substitute or alternative materials, biodegradability, and their manufacturing solutions as well. So yes, I think quite comparable to this, for instance, the replacement of the use of hazardous chemicals by alternatives to reduce the environmental footprint. The use of alternative materials is definitely also an interesting project that could be submitted to the Switch project.
And I see a next one that's just popped in. Who is on the independent panel assessing the proposals? Great question.
That's a great question. I think the very brief answer is not us. So it's very much an independent panel that is not part of the selection of the engagement team that is helping organizations to move towards the project, the submission of proposals. So the independent panel is now being recruited, let's say, but is very much independent. So in that sense, not there to respond to any questions from organizations that might want to submit proposals. So I think we'll keep it secret for now.
Thanks, Hilda. Well, I think we have addressed all of the questions. Just to re-emphasize, we will take note of all of these and give also a formal answer to them in a FAQ that will be also shared with all of you attending today, together with the recording of this session, so that you can watch it back if you feel compelled to do so, or if you need to share it with your colleagues. And my last note, I suppose, would just be, and I'll click to the next slide, that any questions or inquiries that come to mind after today's session can be absolutely directed to us. We are here to help you in any way we can to get these proposals through. So you can see the special email address there, switch2circulareconomy@unedo.org, and please feel free to reach out, and we're happy to answer any of those questions. I see one final question we'll squeeze in because we have 4 minutes left. Would a software tool or platform for waste management be applicable or be eligible? I'm not sure if this is to do with a plastics or a textiles perspective, but I think we can answer more generally.
So for sure, not as a lead applicant, for sure also not as a co-applicant. It could be an associated party, depending, of course, on the, let's say, the role that this software tool platform plays. But in that sense, in that form, it could be. And again, the same rule applies only if the software tool developer is based in a developing country. Direct support can actually be provided to that organization. But so as an associated party, yes, a software tool or platform, if it plays a crucial role obviously in the project, could be included in a consortium, but not as a lead applicant and not as a co-applicant.
Great. That was the final question. I will just take a moment to say thank you all for attending, for giving us an hour of your time. A big thanks from me on behalf of the whole Switch team here. Again, any questions or inquiries that you have, feel free to email us at the email you see here on your screen, and we will be following up with recording and with the FAQ document, which will also include links to all of the relevant documentation online again. So thank you all so much, and hope to see your applications come through, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.